Stobo here, back with the Twist for the Twisted horror short story novel. This is Horror Stories for October 4. Just wanted to quickly say I am getting slightly discouraged on this channel because I'm not getting as many likes anymore. I'm not getting as many views. I'm not getting any comments unless it's from people I personally know. So please, if y'all feel like I'm doing a good job, please drop it in the comments. I would really, really like to know, really appreciate it. Because I see y'all like getting to like 60, 70 views. But y'all can leave some comments, please. Like, let me know. I want the feedback. I need the feedback. Okay? Please, like, subscribe, share, mainly subscribe, comment, like, subscribe. Please, do it all. So, without further ado, story number 4. The British are coming. Again, I'm going out of order in my book. This is actually story number 2 that I wrote in the book, but I'm reading it as story number 4 because I'm just bouncing around. So, let's dive into it. New York was a state occupied by the British in the Revolutionary War. There were so many dead British soldiers at the end of the war that the newly freed United States buried British soldiers in our land. We have been told all your life that once you're dead, and the supernatural isn't real, but you've been lied to. In the year of 1778, the British king found an ancient stone at a black market auction. The stone was rumored to be able to bring one man back to life and fill him with the powers of the dark magic. Giving the stone to his trusted general, the king was going to make sure the British would win the war. George Washington called for his messenger, Paul Revere. Mr. Washington trusted Paul with the task of delivering a letter explaining about the stone and its powers that he gathered from his spy, Sebastian Green. Paul was to deliver this letter to Mr. Washington, but Mr. Washington's most trusted assassin, Basil Blaine. As Mr. Blaine set out on his mission to get the stone from the British, he knew he might not make it back. The enemy camp was only 100 yards away, but the British had no idea, crouching down behind a brush. Mr. Blaine stepped on a branch and broke his cover. Getting captured, the British brought Mr. Blaine to the same tent the stone was being held in. The British soldier who put Mr. Blaine in handcuffs didn't pay any attention to the left. The British soldier who put Mr. Blaine in handcuffs didn't pay any attention and left one loose. Mr. Blaine was able to break out of the handcuffs and grab the stone and a pistol. Exiting out of the tent, Mr. Blaine was shot down. 3 days had passed and General Washington had not heard from Mr. Blaine. Sending out his whole platoon, their order was to kill all the British in the campsite. General Washington's troops made it to the British campsite and opened fire. They didn't wait until they saw the British because Mr. Blaine's body was strung up in the middle of the camp and had been beaten by the British soldiers. The British emerged from their tents, but it was only to get shot down. Washington's men were showing no mercy to the British that beat and killed and hanged their friend. Once all the British soldiers were killed, Washington ordered his men to bury the British soldiers, hoping they were burying the stone. The war went on, and this burial site is now a historic cemetery in New York 253 years later. There are apartment buildings on both sides of the cemetery. There was a man who lived in one of the apartments, and on the anniversary of the British being buried, he started having very bad nightmares. A stone in a very old shop is what the nightmares were about, almost as if it were calling to him. The man awoke in the middle of the night, so he decided to go for a walk. With his head down and his hands in his pockets, he set off down the street. Lost in his thoughts, the man suddenly stopped. He looked up, stunned at what he saw. It was the old building from his dreams. It was as if his body was no longer in control as he reached out for the door handle. There was a lot of old objects on the shelf, none of which were there in his dreams. In the dream, after he entered the store, he walked to the third row of the second shelf. That is where he found the stone. Still in a dazed state, he walked to the third row and looked on the second shelf but found no stone. Kneeling down, the man's eyes turned a blinding yellow and pressed a secret button under the shelf that caused the shelf to split in half and dropped the stone to the floor. Picking up the stone with his eyes still yellow, the man headed out of the shop and back down the street. No longer in control, the man headed straight into the historic British Revolutionary burial grounds. He didn't seem lost. It was like he knew exactly what he was doing. The stone was leading the man to the grave of the trusted British general, the original owner of the stone. Taking the stone out of his pocket, the hypnotized man held it up over the grave. The stone turned a bright red. Then the soul of the general emerged. The spirit took over the man's body, bringing the British general back to life. Breathing fresh air for the first time in 253 years, in his new body, he smiled and turned to his dead platoon. Raising his hand, the 20 graves of his platoon and his lieutenant glowed red. After a few minutes, the zombified bodies of the dead soldiers rose with their muskets and swords ready for battle. With a whole platoon ready to fight and die for Britain once again, the soldiers headed out of the cemetery and into New York streets. The army started shooting and slicing every man, woman, and child in sight. Holding nothing back, the British army pressed on. Citizens were calling the police, hoping they could stop the British zombies, but it was no use. Bullets were no use against the British zombie soldiers. A fog fell in the streets as the bodies from the British piled. A fog rolled in the streets as the bodies from the British piled up. Blood was covering every inch of the asphalt. I feel like I should explain. I meant by bodies from the British, dead human bodies from the dead British zombie soldiers. So zombies are killing the innocent people and they're piling up. The police that showed up to the scene were brutally shot and were being eaten by some of the British soldiers, but the general stopped his men. The worst of them had just shown up. Another platoon of zombies were approaching from the other end of the street. The citizens were running scared, but the second platoon were not hurting the humans. The British growing very angry, it was clear that this new platoon was here to stop the British. The new zombies were dressed in different clothing, but could it be possible that they were rebels who fought the British all those years ago? It didn't seem to matter because the citizens were seeing them take out the British soldiers with their very own police when their very own police force couldn't. Now, zombie bodies were littering the blood-soaked streets, and the citizens were still running from the gunfight. The British general raised his gun to fire, but stopped because the rebel general had his gun raised to fire as well. How is it even possible you are here? The stone brought us back to life, not you rebel fools, said the British general. Obviously you don't know the whole story. It may bring the dead back to life, but also the dead's killer. It's the stone's way of good and evil. Now drop your weapon or die again, lobsterback, screamed the rebel general. The two generals met in heated battle. They dropped their firearms and drew their swords. The two swords could be heard clashing together for miles. Finally, the British general got the upper hand and stabbed the rebel general in the stomach. Okay. This only brought the two generals close together, allowing the rebel general to cut the head off the British general. Both falling to their knees, the rebel soldiers gathered around the lieutenant while holding his rebel general in his arms. He was given the order to rebury the British and stand guard for if they were ever rose again. The stone was ordered to be buried with the rebel general. Half the platoon that was left after the battle were ordered to guard the general's tomb. That night was a horrific night and brought death to many. The civilians never visit the cemetery anymore, due to fear, and a new stone sat out front reading, "With liberty and justice for all." So that was The British Are Coming. I hope you all enjoyed. So please, again, like, subscribe, share, drop your comments down below. Please, I really would love comments on my videos, letting me know if I'm doing a good job, letting me know, if you like the stories, if you don't, what I need to improve on, what you'd like to see more of. If you have any ideas for my setup, just let me know. Okay? So please, drop your stuff in the comments. Like, subscribe, share, and like always, this is Stobo. Deuces.